Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Homeschool Minnesota. My name is Dale Annan. It's so nice to have you guys here with us today. So right now we're in the midst of celebrating 250 years of our great country. And so today I wanted to talk with someone who we've had on before and who has written extensively on the history of our nation, Mr. William Federer. In his book, America's God and Country, he has compiled quotes from historical leaders. It gives us a great way to see what was happening in our country from their point of view. His wife, Susie, also wrote Miracles in American History, 32 amazing stories of answered prayer based on his book, American Minute. So please welcome Mr. William Federer. Welcome.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. Um, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, like how you got involved, like so interested in history and what, all of that?
Well, I've written about 30 books back in the early 1990s. I decided I was teaching a Bible class, and I thought I'd check out a book from the library about what famous people said about the Bible. And I couldn't find one. And so I decided to read through all the colonial charters and found out that every colony was started by a different Christian denomination. Virginia was Anglican, Massachusetts was Puritan, Rhode Island was Baptist, New York was Dutch Reformed, Connecticut and New Hampshire were Congregationalist, Maryland Catholic, Delaware and New Jersey were originally Swedish Lutheran, and Pennsylvania Quaker, and they did not get along, but they all had to work
Wow.
together during the Revolution. And so then I read through every state constitution. In 1776, 9 of the original 13 state constitutions required office holders to be Protestant. 3 said all you had to do was be a plain Christian. And their fear was that the new federal government would pick one denomination, make it the national. And so they had a First Amendment saying Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Why? Because different states had established their religion, right? And then there's an Irish potato famine. Millions of Irish Catholics come to America. Then they get tolerated. Then there's a persecution of Jews. They come over, they get tolerated, and then finally, the tolerance went out to the atheists and the secularists and the transgendered and the Satanists and Islamists, and the last ones in want to kick the first ones out.
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
way it
I read
works.
I read through the messages and papers of the president. A
Mhm.
multi-volume had every address by every president up through George W. And I was amazed. You had presidents declaring days of prayer, days of thanksgiving, and even days of fasting. James Madison had a day of fasting and prayer when the British burned the White House during the War of 1812. Zachary Taylor, the 12th president, had a day of fasting and prayer during a cholera epidemic in 1849. Lincoln had 2 days of fasting and prayer during the Civil War. Even Woodrow Wilson had a day of fasting and prayer during World War I. And then you had presidents like Franklin Roosevelt who gave out New Testaments and Book of Psalms to all the soldiers by the millions. And he wrote the foreword, as Commander in Chief, I take pleasure in commending the reading of the Bible to all who serve in the armed forces. I read through Supreme Court decisions and acts of Congress, and so I put them all in a book, and it's called America's God and Country,
Yeah.
Encyclopedia of Quotations. It's a 845-page reference book. So Abigail Adams is under A, Lincoln is under L, Jefferson under J, Booker T. Washington under W. So you get to open it up and just have the quotes about what these famous people said about God. And it's the book went on to sell over 500,000 copies, and so that opened the door for me to do other books. And so I've written about 30 books over the last 30 some odd years.
Wow. I mean, I love the idea of a book of quotes on from all of our founding fathers and just from people just in general who have had a very integral part in the foundation of our country and continue to building our country. And I would guess, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but there's thousands of quotes in there. Am I correct?
Oh yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
is one where um, I've had congressmen tell me they've quoted out of it on the floor of Congress. I was with
Wow.
Louis Gohmert, congressman from Texas. He goes, I quoted out of your book so many times. The Supreme Court cited the book. In 2003, there was the city of Greece, New York, opening with prayer in Jesus' name. And the
Wow.
ACLU sues to stop. And the Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy writes the decision. And he said, even our Continental Congress opened with prayer in Jesus' name. It's okay. Here's the prayer. And then cites the source, W. Federer, America's God and Country. And
Wow.
my friends that write history books, they go, how did you get the Supreme Court to mention your book by name in the decision? Right. And so, so it's become a classic reference book. Innumerable pastors. I've had teachers use them. I've had students use them in their, papers. I have a little saying: "Let history say what you can't."
Mm.
And so, if you're in a public setting and they say, "Oh no, you can't pray here," it's like, well, can I read a quote from John F. Kennedy's inaugural address where he said, "The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God." It's like, who's going to tell you you can't quote from Kennedy's or a quote from Harry S. Truman's inaugural address, 1949, where he said, "We believe all men are created equal because we're created in the image of God."
Wow.
Who's going to tell you not to quote from a Democrat president's inaugural? So you can let history say what you can't. You can't say that. Well, can I quote from a Democrat president? Well, yeah.
Well, I think too, the thing that I like about that too is that so often in the news, in the media, I mean, all different walks of life in education, we're being told what was going through the minds of our founding fathers. Well, this is what they really meant when they did this or this or this. But when you look at your book, it gives us the actual quotes from these actual people that are not always really well known quotes, I guess. And it really shows you what's going on in the heart of that person, like Thomas Jefferson or John Adams or George Washington. And so, what is the importance of understanding like the heart and the actual like where that person was spiritually in of our historical figures?
Yeah, a really good question. The the Pilgrims and Puritans came over, and they believed that God loves you and He wants you to love Him back. But for love to be loved, it must be voluntary. So they fled from England, where the king was the head of the Anglican Church. And if you did not believe the way the Anglican Church did, you were persecuted. You were put in jail. You were dragged before the Star Chamber, where they would brand you on the face as a heretic with the letters SL for seditious libel. They'd cut off your
Wow.
ear, even cut your nose off, and then put you in jail. And they wouldn't feed you. You had to have some friend that missed you that would bring you food. And many of them would die in prison. And so you even had the killing time. So England came up with the Book of Common Prayer. It's actually a good book, but if you felt like praying, you couldn't make up your own prayers. You just opened it to the right page and read the prayer out of the Book of Common Prayer. And so the people in Scotland were Presbyterian, and they did not want to use the Anglican Book of Common Prayer. The king sent up his army to force them to use it. They decided they just wouldn't even meet in the church building. They'd meet in an open field. The king sent his army into the open field to chase them down and kill them. It's called the killing time. And so this gives you an idea of what was going on in Europe. What the king believed, the kingdom had to believe.
Yeah.
Whether you believed it or not, you had to say you did. And that was hypocritical. And so William Penn, who spent 8 months in the Tower of London, said, "Force makes hypocrites. 'Tis persuasion only that makes converts." And so they got the Quakers fleeing to Pennsylvania and all these different groups. And so the idea in America is that we wanted freedom of conscience so that you could love God voluntarily.
Yeah.
And now they would not want somebody to come in and take advantage of that freedom to teach an anti-Christian message. Their original idea was simply to put all the Christians on a level playing field.
Yeah.
And so the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is Joseph Story. And he said the real purpose of the First Amendment was not to countenance, much less advance, Mohammedanism, Judaism, or infidelity by prostrating Christianity, but simply to exclude rivalry among the Christian sects. SECTS, just to put them all on the same level playing field. But they never imagined that you would be allowing to bring in, Satanism and transgenderism and Islamism, and then
Yeah.
prefer that and outlaw Christianity. They would never. That would be like telling them someday people won't breathe air. It's like they couldn't conceive of that.
Yeah. That's crazy. I think that, and today, given today's political climate, and here we are getting ready to celebrate, well, we are celebrating. Let's just be honest, it's been happening for a few weeks now, but the 250th birthday of our country, and how, given, when we feel out what is happening today, the division, the divisiveness that is being, even just, I guess, perpetuated by mainstream media, by I don't know, just so many things, so many factors. It doesn't even have to be just that. But um, what is the one idea that is most misunderstood by the founding fathers? Like the one idea that they put forward that is most misquoted, most misunderstood.
Yeah, well, the separation of church and state. And again, it was simply to keep the federal government from picking one Christian denomination and preferring it over the others, which
Yes.
is what every other country in the world did. England was Anglican, Scotland was Presbyterian, Holland was Dutch Reformed, Germany was Lutheran, Switzerland Calvinist, Italy, Spain, France, Austria, Poland Catholic, Greece was Greek Orthodox, Russia was Russian Orthodox. And then the Ottoman Empire, all right, was Islam. But
So
it was one denomination per country. And if you did not believe the way your king did, it was considered treason. And so there's this mass migration of people shifting around Europe for conscience sake. They spill over, found colonies in America. And again, every colony was started by a different denomination. And so the purpose was the colonies jealously held to their own denomination, and they didn't want a big federal Walmart denomination coming in and
yeah,
squeezing out their local mom and pop denominations. And so at the time of the founding, the Anglican, and then once they got rid of the king, it was called Episcopal. But the Episcopal church was the most popular church in America. And then the second was the Congregational Church in New England.
mm,
And so these other different colonies are like, wait a second, you know, New Jersey was Presbyterian and Rhode Island was Baptist, and they felt like they were being squeezed out. And so you had this movement where they wanted to limit the federal government from picking one denomination. So they put it as First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So it's a double handcuff. They can't pick one denomination, and they can't interfere with the individual states that have their own denominations. And establishment was a clearly understood term. It was one, you couldn't hold office in Virginia unless you were an Anglican. You had to take the oath of supremacy, acknowledging the king as the head of the church. So all the Virginia founding fathers, Jefferson, Madison, Washington, they all were faithful Anglicans. Why? Because you couldn't even hold office if you weren't. Second establishment was that you had to pay taxes to support the denomination. So everybody in Virginia paid tax to the government, a tithe, and then the government paid the pastors, which is still the way they do it in Germany today.
wow.
So in Germany, if you get a job, you check on your little W-2 form what denomination you go to, and the government will withhold the tithe from your paycheck and funnel it to your pastor. And that way the pastor doesn't have to do the messy stuff of taking up an offering. The problem is the younger generation in Germany realizes they can give themselves a 10% raise by not checking the church box. And so you have all these young people identifying as atheists. And so what happens is that the Christian church loses its strength, and you come into a secular Europe that quickly gets co-opted by Islam. And Islam comes in very aggressive. Can have 4 wives. They put their wives in different apartments. The wives go down to the welfare office, say, my husband's not around, and they get welfare checks. And the guy visits the wives. The more children they have, the larger the welfare checks get. And
Yeah.
these Muslim men are living like a prince with their harem, all paid for at state expense. And the typical Muslim woman has 5 children, where the Europeans are maybe having 1.
Yeah.
And so they estimate that within a relatively short amount of years, they'll have a majority and take over Europe and just simply vote in Sharia. Um, and this is what they're attempting to do in America. And with Mondami being elected mayor of New York, they're all thrilled that, hey, we can do this. And so they're targeting all the different areas in America where there's a low voter turnout, and the Muslims vote as a block.
Yeah.
100% of them vote. And so
Yeah.
we're still, if we get about 20% of the Christians voting, it's like, oh, we don't know if we should vote or not. Well, the Muslims vote, and they're
Yeah.
taking over. And then Sharia law ends up crowding out the freedoms before. But that was something the founders could not have imagined. They thought separation of church and state was simply not preferring one denomination over the other.
Wow. I mean, I think about that and I think about like living in Minneapolis and how things here are so different than they were. Just my husband and I lived here in the early 90s and it was completely different than it is now. And after we've come back off the mission field and yeah, I see exactly what you're talking about, honestly, in my day-to-day life here. Um
Yeah, they call it Dawah, Dawah. Dawah. It's immigration jihad.
yeah,
So their
boy.
goal is a one world government called the caliphate, under one Muslim leader called the caliph. And they think there will be world peace when all the enemies of Islam are destroyed. So they are a religion of peace. It's just their definition of peace is world Islam.
Very different
And
than
so
ours.
there's a fast way of doing it with a sword, and there's a slow way of doing it through immigration. It's called dawah, but their goal's the same. It's a one world antichrist government, specifically antichrist. Surah 572 says, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you have committed the unforgivable sin called shirk that condemns you to the fires of hell. You
Wow.
cannot be any more antichrist than by specifically saying, if you believe in Christ, you go to hell. So if there ever was a religion of antichrist, it fits the bill.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
I
so
mean,
we're so
it's true. It's true. And we're there. We're right there at the precipice of it in our country right now. Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit and move on to your book, Miracles in American History, your wife's book, Susie. Miracles in American History, that was based on your book, American Minute. It has 32 answers to prayer that defined America. And I like this. I think it's an encouraging book. I think it's something as homeschool families we should actually have in our library and our kids should be reading and we should be reading as well. So can you tell us one or two of the stories from there of answered prayer that just changed the course of history?
yeah, so the Pilgrims come across, and 102 of them, half of them died the first winter. They probably wouldn't have survived. But the first spring, 1621, out of the woods comes an Indian who speaks to them in perfect English, Squanto.
Yeah.
And he had been kidnapped a dozen years before and was in England. And so you could just imagine him walking out of the woods saying, "Oh, you guys from England? Yeah, I used to live there." And and so
Shocking.
since he grew up in that area of Massachusetts, he knew how to catch fish, how to grow corn, how to trade with the Indians, and how to catch beaver. And so William Bradford says he was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. Another is during the French and Indian War. The British have Commander Edward Braddock, and he's marching toward Pittsburgh, Fort Duquesne, and they're ambushed. 900 British get killed. Braddock gets killed, and a colonel named George Washington in his early 20s takes control, and he organizes a retreat, and he gets back to Fort Cumberland, and he writes about, by the all-powerful dispensations of Providence, I've been protected beyond all human probability, for I had 4 bullets through my coat, 2 horses shot under me, yet escaped unhurt. And so that's a miracle. Had he been killed, we wouldn't have had a Washington to lead us through the Revolution.
No.
Another is the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. It's the biggest battle of the Revolution. The Americans are dug in, facing the water. The harbor fills up with 400 British ships, 32,000 British troops, and the British find a loyalist who shows the British where to land and marches them all night long through Jamaica Pass, and they attack Washington from behind at Brooklyn Heights on August 27th, 1776. 3,000 Americans die, only
Wow.
300 British, and Washington is pinned up against the water. The next day, he's probably going to die, and America will be another colony of Britain like India. But instead, Washington gets every boat he can find to ferry his troops across the East River to Manhattan Island. He's doing it quiet in the dark and as fast as he can, and then the sun starts to come up. He's only moved half the troops. He's a sitting duck. And his chief of intelligence, Major Ben Talmadge, says, as the dawn of the next day approached, those of us who remained in the trenches became very anxious for our own safety. And when the dawn appeared, there were several regiments still on duty. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise off the river and seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well, and so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distance. We tarried until the sun had risen, but the fog remained as dense as ever. Well, they continue, and Washington is on the last boat that leaves. The fog lifts, the British charge, no one's there. It was the last chance the British had to capture the entire American army all at once. Another is Benedict Arnold was the hero of the Battle of Saratoga. He's actually more popular than Washington. He's laid up in Philadelphia to recover, but he's made the military governor, and he gets befriended by Peggy Shippen. They fall in love. They get married. Well, her parents are loyalists. And so when he gets passed over for some promotions, she nags him saying, oh, if you were in the British Army, they'd appreciate what a great general you are. And after a year, he is healed up in his leg enough to become the head of West Point. And he agrees to meet with a British spy and betray West Point on the very day Washington's going to come to visit. And the spy, John Andre, is dressed as a civilian, and he's walking back. And before he can get back to the British, he's stopped by some American guards who search him. And before they let him go, they make him take off his boot. And in the stocking is a map of West Point. And he tries to talk his way out of it. They said, explain it to our commander. And the treasonous trap was stopped. So General Nathaniel Greene writes, treason of the blackest dye was yesterday discovered. General Arnold, who commanded at West Point, was about to give the American cause a deadly wound, if not fatal stab. Happily, the treason had been timely discovered to prevent the fatal misfortune. The providential train of circumstances which led to its discovery affords the most convincing proof that the liberties of America are the object of divine protection. Then you have the Battle of Cowpens in South Carolina toward the end of the war. The British have a Colonel Tarleton, nicknamed the Butcher, because he hacks to death Americans who were trying to surrender at the Battle of Waxhaw. And this Tarleton, if you saw the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, this battle is portrayed in there.
Yes.
But Tarleton is chasing the American general Daniel Morgan, and then later Nathaniel Greene. And so the American has a slow army, and they pick where to fight in front of a river. And if you're ever going to fight a battle, you do not want to fight in front of a river because it makes it hard to run away. But he did it on purpose as a trap. And so he had two groups of soldiers, militia guys off the farm, sharpshooters, but after two shots, they run away. And the Continental soldiers who won't run away. And so this Colonel Tarleton is charging with his cavalry. And the militia guys shoot once, shoot twice, they run away. And the Continental soldiers act like they're going to run away, but they stop, dig their heels in, turn, lower their rifles, and at point-blank range, they kill 100 of the British light cavalry. And the guys that ran away, they just went in a circle and attacked the British from the other side.
Wow.
And 800 of the British surrender. This Colonel Tarleton rides off. When word gets to Lord Cornwallis, he was leaning on his sword. He leaned so hard, the sword broke in half. And so he chases Daniel Morgan and Nathaniel Greene to get his cavalry back. And they cross the Catawba River. The Americans cross. The British show up, but before the British can cross, there is a flash flood, and they're delayed. The Americans cross the Yadkin River. The British show up before they can cross a second flash flood, and the British are delayed. Then they get to the Dan River. The Americans cross before the British can cross a third flash flood. And the British commander, Henry Clinton, writes, here the Royal Army was again stopped by a sudden rise of the waters, which had only just fallen, almost miraculously let the enemy over, who could not else have eluded Lord Cornwallis's grasp, so close was he upon their rear. So this, again, was another miracle in American history. There's lots of these stories. We put them in the book called Miracles in American History. We actually have 2 volumes. In the second volume, we actually have some women of the Revolution. Nancy Hart, who the British, her husband was off fighting, and the British come to her cabin and shoot her turkey and make her cook it for them. And she serves them corn whiskey, so they're not paying really good attention. And she's taking their muskets from one side of the cabin to the other where her daughter is hiding. And one soldier sees it and jumps up. The daughter cocks the rifle, hands it to the mom. She pulls the trigger, shoots him dead. And before anybody can move, the daughter cocked another rifle, handed it to the mom, and she points it and says, the first one to move is dead. And they're all like frozen. She keeps them at gunpoint for 2 hours. The husband shows up, and she insists they all be hung. But that's Nancy Hart. Another's
Wow.
Molly Pitcher, and she is, the, carrying her pitcher of water around the battlefield to the soldiers. And when her husband faints of heat stroke, she has him put she puts her bucket down and she picks up loading the cannon. And she fights the rest of the battle loading the cannon. And at one point, a cannonball went directly between her legs, tearing off the bottom of her petticoat. And she said, "Well, that could have been worse," and went back to loading the cannon. And George
Wow.
Washington, when he heard about her, awarded her a commission as a non warrant as a non-commissioned officer, Sergeant Molly Pitcher. And
Wow.
anyway, just fascinating stories. One that people overlook is Washington at Yorktown was running out of money, and the army was dissolving. They were going back to their farms, and here he is right about to win, and his army starts to leave. And the French are coming across, and they stop off to get money at Cuba. And the ladies of Havana donate their jewelry and silverware, $28 million worth, and they send a note that America's mothers' sons would not be born as slaves. And they deliver this to Washington, and he's able to keep his army together and win the Battle of Yorktown to end the war. Yeah.
Interesting, because, you don't think about how we kind of owe Cuba for that. Like, if they that's just I just find that very, very fascinating and interesting. I didn't know that story. Huh.
Yeah, and you had the governor of New Spain, Bernardo de Galvez. Galveston, Texas is named after him. And he drives the British out of the Caribbean. And
Wow.
he wins the Battle of Pensacola and the Battle of Natchez and the Battle of Baton Rouge and all these different cities. And so he's got guys from Mexico and Costa Rica and Guatemala and Cuba, and they're all fighting
Wow.
with this army of New Spain against the British to help America.
I
And
love
so
that.
Galvez was made an honorary American citizen. He actually came up to Philadelphia and was in their victory parade, sitting in the carriage next to George Washington.
That's amazing. So prayer, is very key to our history. And we're gonna link these books because I really believe that every American family should have these books on their shelves. I really do. Um, but can you tell us just a little bit about what you know about the prayer lives of some of our founding fathers and significant leaders?
Yeah, well, they had days of prayer. When the British blockaded Boston Harbor, Thomas Jefferson drafted a day of fasting and prayer, introduced it in the Virginia legislature, and it passed. And to June 1st, 1774, George Washington writes in his diary, went to church, fasted all day, right? And then you had numerous times where the Continental Congress declared days of fasting and prayer. One was just 2 months before they did the Declaration of Independence. The Continental Congress issues the proclamation that in what? Let me just read a little bit of this. We recommend the 17th of May, 1776, as a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer, confess and bewail our manifold sins, and through the merits of Jesus Christ, obtain pardon and forgiveness. Through
Wow.
Jesus Christ, right? So they were
Wow.
Christian. And then Washington orders his troops to observe the days of fasting and prayer.
Yeah, yeah.
And so they have numerous of these. Madison had a day of fasting and prayer during the War of 1812 when the British burned the White House. Zachary Taylor was the 12th president. He had a day of fasting and prayer during a cholera epidemic in 1849. Lincoln had 2 days of fasting and prayer during the Civil War. One of them, it was to be observed on April 30th, 1863. So what happened after that? 2 days later, the South shoots one of their own best generals, Stonewall
Oh,
Jackson. He's an outstanding general. He's winning 2-1 at Chancellorsville, and he's coming back at twilight, and his own men shoot him. And just about every Civil War historian will say if Stonewall Jackson had been at Gettysburg 2 months later, the South may have won.
wow.
And now it's hard to reconcile because Stonewall Jackson was a godly man,
Yeah.
but it wasn't God's will for slavery to continue and for the country to be split.
Thank God.
But it was Lincoln, 2 days after Lincoln's day of fasting and prayer. Woodrow Wilson had a day of fasting and prayer during World War I. And Franklin Roosevelt gave out Gideon's New Testament and Book of Psalms to all the soldiers during World War II. And Harry S. Truman made the Day of Prayer an annual event, and Reagan made it the first Thursday in May, and even George H.W. Bush had the International Year of Bible Reading. And so we have this heritage in America
Yeah.
that we need to remind ourselves that even though the left has co opted the education system and is pushing their leftist stuff, the real history shows that we had Christians of different denominations. At the time the country was founded, 98% of the country was Protestant, 3 million people, 1% Catholic, only 30,000 Catholics. Catholics originally were only allowed in 3 colonies, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York, and 0.1% Jewish. 3,000 Jews in a country of 3 million people, only 7 synagogues in the entire country. But it was 100% Judeo Christian, believing that there is a creator. We are made in his image. He gives us rights. The government's purpose is to guarantee to us our creator given rights. And this creator is not a respecter of persons, so we're all equal. And these are basic Bible ideas that are incorporated into our Declaration and Constitution.
Wow. So just to kind of wrap things up, going forward, as Christians, you know, can you encourage us today? Just give us a little bit of an encouragement to um, just do the same. Prayer, fasting. These books are just, to me, it's just an opportunity to really know what it is that God has done for our country. What can we do going forward to honor that heritage?
Yeah, well, to once you know the history, you can't be pushed over. There is a socialist tactic called deconstruction, where you separate people from the past, get them into a neutral where they don't remember where they came from, and then you brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. It's actually a sales technique. If I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I do is tell you a bunch of negative stuff about the toothpaste you're currently brushing with. You're still brushing with that stuff? Don't you know it'll eat the enamel off your teeth? You're like, ugh, you're repulsed by it. Now I have you in a neutral, you're open minded, we're all the toothpaste out there. And then I give you my pitch for this brand new tartar control breath freshener toothpaste to drive neutral reverse process. So they go into the classrooms and they intentionally tell the kids negative things about the founders. They
Yeah,
took land from Indians. They sold people into slavery. They were chauvinists. Forget the fact they gave you a country where you're in charge of your life and all of us together are in charge of the country rather than a
exactly.
king. Forget all that. They're bad. And so the kids are into a neutral. And they say, okay, well, let's do a comparative religion class and let's start with Islam. And we just won't get time to get around to Christianity. And so they go from the Christian past to a secular present, and then they're prepared for an Islamic future.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to Europe. It went from a Judeo-Christian Europe with Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods to a secular Europe with the French Revolution, free sex, anything goes, let in, all the beliefs are the same, and then into Europe comes Islam. So now the number one name for newborns in Europe is Mohammed. And so really the whole secular transgendered is just a phase. It's a
Yeah.
temporary phase from a Christian past to an Islamic future.
Yeah. So standing up, and I want to just encourage our homeschooling families that are listeners. You guys are in the forefront of changing that, and we're grateful for that. And for parents, discipling your kids in actually who God is, who Christ is, and how he gave us our country and the freedoms that we have and where it comes from. So I just want to thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your historical books, for the works that you've done. I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. My website, again, is AmericanMinute.com, and I send
Yep,
out history emails people can sign up for, AmericanMinute.com. And then some of the books, as you mentioned, Miracles in American History, America's God and Country. I did one on the history of Islam, another on the history of
yep,
socialism. But you can get it all at AmericanMinute.com.
yep. And we'll have everything linked in the show notes of the podcast so y'all can find it very easily. Thank you guys so much for coming. And thank you, Mr. Federer, for your time. I know you're a very busy man, especially right now. So we want to
Oh,
thank you and appreciate you so much.
oh, thank you.